These will be the rules for Jaxson Dart and Ole Miss getting a win in a very tough venue.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This Locked On Ole Miss podcast is your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we break down Lane Kiffin and the Rebels' first SEC road game of the season, and it might be the toughest environment that they are going to face this year. Even as favorites, there are certain ways that Jaxson Dart and Ole Miss need to play if they want to come out on top. Follow these simple rules, and the season can get back on track. Ignore them at your own peril. Don't forget to check out another listen on the channel. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC and Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They provide great perspectives on college football, the SEC, and even Ole Miss. You know how I feel about perspectives. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So we all know that this is going to be a cauldron of a venue. I've talked about this all week. Heck, I've had South Carolina people in my comments for the better part of 8 months pointing to this game. South Carolina has circled this game, which means the fans are going to be unbelievably jacked up. This is a sandstorm type of game. And the players are going to be really ready to go as well, because in this whole Juice Wells story, apparently the players feel a little bit betrayed about that as well. Now, hopefully they keep everything between the whistles and they don't headhunt out there, but it is what it is. How do you handle an environment like that? We need to go back to the Nick Saban School of Football from 2013 to figure out how that gets handled, because South Carolina is going to be unbelievably up because they're about a 10-point favorite or a 10-point underdog in the game as it is. It's a game that they think they can get, but they know they have to be up. You add the extra element of Juice Wells. You add the extra element of Lane Kiffin trolling the fan base during the offseason, and this is going to be a very difficult environment for Ole Miss. So how do you handle that? And you need to go back to what Nick Saban did in the early 2012s to kind of figure it out. And I think that Ole Miss can put a little bit of a splash in it that can help it out. And we're going to also talk about LSU getting a victory there earlier this season. So we're going to start off by saying the run game definitely needs to be packed, and Ole Miss needs to run the football. South Carolina is one of the leading pass rushing teams in all of the conference. The leading sack team in the SEC is Ole Miss, but second is South Carolina. They have two ends that are really good, and they can get after you. Now, this isn't Kentucky's defensive line. There's not a first rounder on that defensive line. Well, maybe Dylan Stewart, but that's down the road. But you should be able to run the football on that. And I'm not saying it's going to be with Henry Parrish or Ulysses Bentley or Rashad Amos or Matt Jones, any of those players. I just think that Ole Miss is going to be able to find somebody to run the ball, because when you go back to that LSU game earlier this month, they started off with Josh Williams, and he had trouble running the football. Caleb Jackson had some trouble running the football. It was their third string running back that came in, and he had some success. I think his name's Caden Davis or something like that, but he was able to have some success. He had a couple of touchdowns, broke off long runs, averaged about 9 yards per carry, running a specific style of running play. Because South Carolina is going to be absolutely juiced up, pun intended, Ole Miss needs to utilize that to their advantage, and I think they will. I think Ole Miss needs to run screens, and they need to run misdirection, and they need to go sideline to sideline. I think window dressing is going to be important with how fast that Ole Miss runs, and I am fully anticipating that game plan. But running the football will be massively important through counters and things like that to utilize their aggression against them. If you can run the ball well, it's going to open up everything else, where all of a sudden Trey Harris becomes much more dangerous. Juice Wells becomes much more dangerous. Jordan Watkins, Caden Priestcorn, heck, Aiden Williams, whoever's out there is going to get much more dangerous than they were because of the running game that Ole Miss can provide. And I think that Ole Miss is going to have probably 5 or 6 type of running plays to where they're going to be able to open up the defense. Now, LSU, I watched that game today specifically to see how they erased that large deficit. Lenore Sellers is a good quarterback in South Carolina, would have probably won that game if he had not gotten hurt. So let me just preface that ahead of time. Their offense is a little bit better than what Kentucky's was coming into the Ole Miss game. Now, their defense is a little bit worse than what Kentucky's was. But LSU used it with basically zone-based run scheme to where they allowed the defensive linemen's aggression and everything to run them out of the play. It turned into an inside zone essentially, but it was running outside the tackle because of the line moving so much. And because that happened, they were able to exploit the defense, and they ended up having numbers in the box. When you looked at the play, you might not have numbers in the box. It was a way to use the South Carolina aggression against them. I think you're going to see counters. I think you're going to see jet sweeps. I think you're going to see Ole Miss tag jet sweeps with an inside zone play as well to keep that defensive line honest. This is a way to kind of neutralize their speed because Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart are 2 of the best pass rushers in the entire conference. I think Kennard has like 5.5 sacks at this point. And if you look at it, they're like 4 games in. So it's going to be a really big deal. And with Ole Miss having rumors of being nicked up on the offensive line, exactly, we'll have to wait until the injury report comes out Wednesday to see exactly what that looks like. Diego Pounce might have his hands full on Saturday with all of that crowd noise and with some speed coming off the edge. This is why it's important to run the ball, because if South Carolina realizes that Jaxson Dart is going to throw the ball, those guys are going to be able to get home. Statistically, historically, they've proven to be able to do that. And if you want an Ole Miss perspective, think about what happened to Bradley Sowell in 2009 when he went into that noisy environment and he had trouble blocking around the end. It's just the way this works from time to time. Running the ball will be massively important, but running the ball in a way that affects this defensive line and slows them down. The other things that could happen is I want to see the screen game come into this game. With a hyper-aggressive defense, I think misdirection plays and screens become much more important. And Ole Miss has some good pass catchers in the backfield to catch those screen passes. Ole Miss doesn't have that on film at the moment. It would catch South Carolina completely off guard, and you would probably get a 20 to 30-yard gain if it was executed on the first time you ran it. But I think bubble screens need to come out. I think jailbreak screens need to come out. I think whatever you can do to make that defensive line go sideline to sideline instead of coming up the field is a win for what you're trying to do. That and the running game will completely neutralize that defensive line. And when that happens, it really gets fun offensively, and you can have happen what LSU was able to do to South Carolina. Remember that when LSU erased that big South Carolina lead by exploiting the middle of the field, passing the ball? How could that impact Ole Miss this week? Stay tuned as we break down what the Rebels need to watch out for. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets, and with killer last-minute deals all in prices, views from receipts, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. You know, there's not a bad seat in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, but Game Time makes it to where you can see exactly what the view would be from that seat on your laptop before you buy the tickets. That's awesome. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time, and with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with tickets as well. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So LSU was able to come back from, I think, a 17-point deficit in Williams Brice Stadium on September 14th, just a couple of weeks ago. And LSU was able to get that win. And we're going to ignore the point that if Lenore Sellers would have probably stayed in that game, South Carolina would have probably won the game. Okay? Robbie Ashford coming in is what kind of hurt Ole Miss and his inability to throw the football. But we're going to focus on LSU's offense going against South Carolina's defense because that's what we're talking about today. And LSU opened up and struggled the better part of the first half. The first quarter was absolutely atrocious offensively, and they could not run the ball. The pass games got locked down because their inability to run the ball, and they found that little running back. And that running back gave them the spark in the run game, and that opened every single thing up. LSU really started attacking the middle of the field with their wide receivers and their tight ends, and they were getting 6 yards, 8 yards, up to 15 and 20 yards, hitting explosive plays. And this is, I think, the blueprint for what Ole Miss needs to do to the secondary. Run the ball, get the defensive line organized to where they don't know what's going to happen, and then you have time to throw the football, and you throw the football. Utilize the quick game where you can. I think Penn State rules apply in this game. It is something to where they have the defensive line to get back there in a hurry. You need to find a way to make them hurt in a hurry. You're not going to be able to run third-level RPOs. You're not going to be able to do stuff like that that can be described a little bit as cute. But if you follow this template, I think you will open them up by the second half of the game. And the second half of the game versus LSU, South Carolina had trouble stopping anything that LSU wanted to do. If you don't believe me, go back and watch the game. Like I said, if Sellers stays in, South Carolina still probably wins the game, but they also had a 17-point lead in the first quarter. After that, it was essentially all LSU. Take away a couple of big plays by Sellers and Rocket Sanders. But if you look at that and you look at what they were able to do in their offense, in their system to completely open up what South Carolina was trying to do to LSU defensively, it was kind of impressive to see LSU's offense do that. And it is also kind of heartwarming to see another team do that to a team that Ole Miss is playing, because everybody saw what happened over the weekend. And then they look back and they think South Carolina beat Kentucky 31-3. But if you watch that game, that 31-3 does not match what happened in the actual ball game. Other than South Carolina being able to get after the quarterback, it was a situation where South Carolina's offense was opportunistic. And that's how they were able to score. They won the field position battle. They were opportunistic. It is going to be important to put South Carolina in very minus possessions in this game. And by minus possessions, I mean they get in the ball at their 25, their 20-yard line, their 15. Make them drive the field. Do not give them the ball at 45-yard line on the plus side of the field. If you do that, you are going to be in trouble. But the pass game can open up. We talk about all the time. Jaxson Dart likes his big plays. He has a really good receiver in Trey Harris. He has Juice Wells on the other side, who was coming into last season, was last season's Trey Harris in the SEC, or Luther Burden. And at tight end, Caden Prescorn is probably the best player in the entire conference. You have Jordan Watkins and those guys, those weapons running in that secondary. If Ole Miss does this correctly, will be open and they'll be able to pull away. Because, listen, this is just the real thing. And Ole Miss is favored by 10 points on the road in a game that they are very fired up to play, okay? But if Ole Miss plays their best and South Carolina plays their best, Ole Miss wins the game. Same situation that happened last week against Kentucky. If Ole Miss plays their best and South Carolina does not play well, it gets ugly. If South Carolina plays their best and Ole Miss plays like they did a week ago, you could have a dogfight in the fourth quarter, and then you have that stadium dynamic and everything going on there, and it comes down to one play, just like it did on Saturday, to where Barry and Brown made the catch on a fourth down, and all of a sudden, Katie bar the door, here it goes. That came down to one play because you allowed them to stay in it. You did not play well. Ole Miss left points on the board on offense. They were committing penalties on defense, and on special teams, they missed a field goal that could have tied it up. Ole Miss lost that game in all three phases. On the road, you cannot do that. Ole Miss has to play well. And I'd like to think in the course of practice this week, Lane Kiffin got their attention. I would like to think that they are ready, or at least more ready, for what they're going to see. Listen, you can give Ole Miss last year all the grief that you wanted to get. They were probably better prepared for SEC play because of the Tulane game than they were this year because of the Wake Forest game. I mean, that's just a real thing. But whether they were ready in game one or not, they need to be ready in game two. So we're going to focus everything on whether or not they're going to be ready in game two. And I think they will be, honestly, because in the second half of the game, sure, there was a couple more mistakes that happened and you had allowed the tempo and the tone of the game to be established, but they played much better in the second half. The offense looked better. The defense looked better. Other than that special teams field goal kick, they looked all right. So if Ole Miss goes up there and plays well, plays clean, no penalties, no turnovers, make South Carolina earn absolutely everything they get, Ole Miss is going to win this football game, because in the secondary, South Carolina is going to have trouble covering these receivers. They're going to have to focus on Trey Harris, because Trey Harris, again, might be the best wide receiver in all of college football. On the other side is Juice Wells, who has all of their attention, as we've seen for the last 8 months on my comment section. And that run game, all of those things, they cannot defend everything. So if they're forced to defend everything, eventually the Ole Miss is going to open them up. And I'm not just talking about a script drive, because Ole Miss is very, very good. They might be the best team in the entire country of scoring on their opening drive and playing on their opening drive like that. But I'm talking about in the second quarter, in the third quarter, because in the second quarter, that has been this season Ole Miss's worst quarter. Maybe not necessarily on the scoreboard, but that has been where weird stuff's happened. That's where Wake Forest happened and Georgia Southern and all of that, to where it just kind of compounded. I'd like to see Ole Miss play a clean second quarter, not necessarily shut out South Carolina, but not let South Carolina score because of self-inflicted wounds. Make them earn it. And if they do that, they will be all right. We'll talk about the defense in just a second. You know, Ole Miss faces a tough physical running team this week. Rocket Sanders rushed for nearly, I think, 200 yards or something in that LSU game. And the defense needs to be what we think they are. Can they step up and dominate the line of scrimmage? Stay tuned for what the Rebels must do to hold strong. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. It's the place to bet which side of Ole Miss being -9.5 for Saturday's game versus South Carolina, and maybe, the over-under, which currently is at 52.5 points. Ole Miss would have been right around that number in most of their games this season by themselves. So that may give you pause for this game. So when you get a hunch like that in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. So the other thing that they say on road games is always pack your run game and pack your defense. You hear that a lot. You've heard that a lot over the last 4 years. And this is no different. This is definitely a pack your defense type of game. And it's not because South Carolina is a great juggernaut of an offense, because this season they haven't particularly been good, but they've been an opportunistic offense. And that is scarier than them being necessarily a good offense, because you never know when this team can jump up and bite you, to where big plays happen in that LSU game that we talked about earlier. Norris Sellers had a 75-yard touchdown. Rocket Sanders had a 75 or 66-yard touchdown or something like that. Nearly half of their yardage for the game came on 2 plays. They have players that can hurt you, real similar, honestly, to what Kentucky had in Barry and Brown and Dane Key. The difference in this situation is the better players on the team are probably Lenore Sellers at quarterback, who I'm expecting back in this week's game, and Rocket Sanders, the transfer from Arkansas. Their talent is in the run game. So Walter Nolan, J.J. Pegues, Princely Amon-Mielon, we'll have to look at the injury report today, but to see how that cut block handled you that you been talking about on Twitter. Ole Miss has a chance to take this game over. If they can make South Carolina one-dimensional, throw the football, South Carolina is not going to score more than 10 points in the game. But if Ole Miss has the same problems that they had against Kentucky, to where you keep drives alive, that allows the crowd to get a little bit more amped, and that allows South Carolina to get a little bit more confidence. And if that happens, you could be in a little bit of trouble. Listen, South Carolina can win this game. They've always been able to win this game. But if Ole Miss plays its best and South Carolina plays its best, they will not win this game. But the trick is for Ole Miss to play their best. And the trick is for South Carolina to make sure that Ole Miss does not while playing your best. That is the whole key to what this game is going to be on Saturday. It's going to be about making Ole Miss play less than what they are capable of and maxing out every little thing, just like Kentucky did the week before. That is how upsets happen. And that upset was at home. This one's on the road, and this place is going to be absolutely amped. Now, there is history of this going on. Ole Miss made a history of beating Alabama in 2014 and 2015. Alabama rebounded both times. Ohio State at that same time frame lost at home to a 6-6 Virginia Tech team, ended up winning the national title. There's a precedence for being able to withstand an early loss and correct everything and be exactly what you thought they could have been. Ole Miss beat Florida. Florida rebounded, won all their games in the national title. Ole Miss beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame rebounded, won all their games, won the national title. If you have the mettle to do it, if you are as good as we think you are, you have the ability to do it. But it all starts this week because Ole Miss is at a crossroads right now. And it is because of the transfer portal nature of their team that this happens. They have a higher ceiling than Ole Miss has ever had in the history of their school. Ole Miss's ceiling is absolutely national title, but their floor is a little bit low. And if for some reason the playoffs become off the table, you're going to see that locker room start to change. That's just the way of modern college football right now. I mean, you would see opt-outs in a Gator Bowl right now to where Austin Simmons is having to quarterback that game because none of the upperclassmen are going to play. It is how these transfer portal teams look when things go south. Picture what Florida State did a year ago in a bowl game. That is on the table. So when I talk about the ceiling and how high this team can get and how low this team can get, it is not an indictment on this team at all. This is still the best roster that Ole Miss has ever assembled, period. But there's also a pathway that this could go sideways on Ole Miss if Ole Miss drops this game at South Carolina. Because if Ole Miss drops this game at South Carolina, this is as close to a must-win game as you can have without it actually being a mathematical must-win game. Ole Miss loses this game with Georgia still on the schedule, it could go sideways in a hurry. But if Ole Miss wins this game, and Ole Miss goes down to Tiger Stadium and wins the game, Ole Miss is essentially, after the LSU game, exactly where everybody thought they would be. And Ole Miss is right in the mix for the playoff. That Georgia game is still a free shot. Everything is necessary, and all the goals are at your fingertips if you're a player at the University of Mississippi. As long as Ole Miss wins games and keeps winning over the course of this season, you'll see this team continue to play hard and play well. Now, they did not play particularly well, but I don't think it was a anything nefarious or anything against Kentucky. It just didn't work out. It happens. It's a football game. So we'll see over the course of the next few games of how Ole Miss is able to recover and whether or not they're going to be able to withstand this pressure. Like I said earlier in the show, I've said my piece on what happened in Kentucky, but the reality of it is that Kentucky loss does not change anything, and Ole Miss has the ability to accomplish all of their goals if they get right. I'm going to assume that I got hurt. I'm going to assume that everybody got hurt, and that against the South Carolina game, they're going to do what Ole Miss did last year. After this same thing happened against Alabama, they went out against LSU and was basically unstoppable offensively. So we'll see how it goes the rest of the season. But this game is a crossroads type game. Ole Miss needs to win it in a really bad way. The next 2 wins essentially became must wins with that Georgia game still looming. Now, they're not as good as what they have been apparently over the last couple of years. They're in a similar situation, believe it or not, as Ole Miss right now. But we'll see how it goes and how it looks when it gets a little bit closer. It should be great. But that's the 3 things to watch for this weekend against the South Carolina Gamecocks. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. You know, we pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number 1 Ole Miss podcast out there. Your support means the world to us. Thank you very much for making it the first listen of the day. Now go check out Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumor, I think, heck, UTEP is looking at the Mountain West right now. Everybody's going everywhere. It's like that scene from basketball, essentially. But Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider, the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. Our texting program sends you notifications on anything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial on it and experience the future of college football sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description as well. For those of you watching on YouTube, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.